that 12th and 13th rib, you put your hand on the back. If the spine is where my fingertips are, and you cup your hand, and you go down about 4 inches, and you feel for marbling there, very gently because it's liquid, it'll squish out. But you know you've got a good cattle judge if they know how to feel for marbling on a calf. And you don't get it by running your hand across the back, because that's not how we grade cattle, folks. So our USDA yield grade is computed using the back fat of the 12th rib, ribeye area, hod carcass weight, and then kidney, pelvic, and heart fat. And so I'm not going to run through a lot of this except to tell you that they determine cutability. A yield grade 1 has more than 52.3% boneless, closely trimmed retail cuts. A yield grade 5 has 45% or lower. And so when we break this down, it may not seem like a lot, but if I have a yield grade 3 with 50% cutability versus a yield grade 4 with 45% cutability, I'm going to show you what that means in total pounds of product and value to these animals. And I hope when I'm done tonight, it'll explain a little bit about the value differences. So yield grade 4s and 5s are from 7/10 on up. Grid pricing, and this is where this gets fun to me, it's based upon several factors at a plant over time, but it takes into effect the quality grade and the yield grade, and it also takes into account plant-to-plant variation and day-to-day variation. What that means is how well have their cattle graded that week. Different plants will give you a slightly different grid by 1 or 2%. If you've got a JBS plant and a Tyson plant within the same region, they may be a couple cents off for what their floor is on a choice yield grade 3, or their premiums may be off, and it will be based upon, quite frankly, within a short period of time, where their meat sales have been. What do they need? If they don't have enough prime in their locker that week, they will pay you a couple cents more for the prime cattle. So it takes into account all kinds of things at the plant level, and we are really shooting for upper 2/3 choice and prime on a quality grade. And the values that we're getting for these products today bear this out. Now, how many of you have not heard of the Choice Select spread? Everyone's heard of it?
I'm not.
Okay.
There you go.
Thanks, Steve. You're an honest guy. It is the difference between a choice carcass between 600 and 900 pounds and a select carcass between 600 and 900 pounds. And if you look at the 5-year average, the Choice Select spread has been anywhere between roughly 8 and 20 cents. If you look at 2022, the Choice Select spread all the way out to the right was over 26 cents a pound. Now, on an 850-pound carcass, that's real dollars. The thing that I don't show here is that the prime choice spread was also over $20. So there was nearly 45-cent premium per pound of carcass weight difference between a prime and a choice, or a prime and a select animal last year, towards the end of the year.
What, go back one, why was November such a drop?
I have no idea. I made several phone calls. I can't figure out. No one had a great reason for why that 1 week drop. I wish it hadn't occurred. I've got this going back years and have never seen that before. Okay. If you go on to USDA and you know where to look, and you do a Google search for USDA beef carcass price equivalent value index, this is what the grid is based off of. And all this says is, and I took this last week, March 24th, a choice carcass was worth $257.72 per hundredweight, and a select was worth $245. But I kind of like to geek out on this a little bit. And so if you look at the grid, that was their published grid. Now all that's saying is that I want you to go over to that like third column from the right where it says carcass weight 600 to 900 pounds and the value of $274.94. All this is saying is if it was a prime carcass between yield grade 1 and yield grade 3, it was worth, I'm going to convert this to pounds, $2.74 a pound. If it was a CAB, which is what certified is, it was worth $2.63. If it was a choice yield grade 1, it was worth $2.61. That means low choice. If it was a select yield grade 1, it was worth $2.47. It was a standard, it was worth $2.28. If it was a prime yield grade 4, it was worth $2.61 again. Well, what's that really look like? They give you more information. Last week, a CAB, certified Angus beef, on average was a $4.71 premium. An all natural was $33 per hundredweight premium. A non-hormone treated was $22 premium. Dairy type was $2.64 discount. A bullock or a stag, $36 discount because they're not eligible for grading. Hard bones, $35. Dark cutters, $34. Over 30 months of age, $14. The discounts in general are much bigger than the premiums. So, what I did is I put together a little graph and I put all those things in there. And looking at the base price of a choice yield grade 3, all the stuff in red are the discounts. So what it basically says is, we don't want cattle that don't marble, and we especially don't want cattle that don't marble that have a lot of excess back fat, because they become select yield grade 4s and 5s. And so what we're really shooting for are yield grade 3s, because 1s and 2s are really rare. We're really shooting for yield grade 3s that can be choice and prime. And this is what the grid from all of those look like. A lightweight discount under 600 pounds was $11.57 per hundredweight. A heavyweight discount, which occurred at a carcass weight of 1,050 over, was only a $5 discount. Why is the discount so much greater for a lightweight carcass than a heavyweight carcass? Takes the same amount of labor to kill it. It takes up shackle space. It's a steak that doesn't fit in a box. There are markets for big steaks. There are not enough markets for those little steaks that are 9, 10-inch ribeyes from lightweight carcasses. It's a huge discount. So when I put this together, a prime yield grade 1, and these were all the same carcass weight, at $2.79 a pound, was worth $2,437. If I go down to looking at a choice yield grade 3, it was worth $2,255. A select yield grade 3 was worth $2,143. And the values over all the way to the right that are either positive or negative, positive above, are relative to the choice yield grade 3. Because the choice yield grade 3 is always your base price on any grid. And just what I want you to see is, in this market, a select yield grade 4 is paying you $213 less. But a prime yield grade 4 pays you $114 premium. What that really is saying is the value of those prime carcasses is at an all-time high. Last year, was the highest value of prime beef on a wholesale level ever in the United States, and we hit nearly 10% prime. If I went back 5 years, 7 years, 8 years, for 2 decades, we were saying 3 to 4% prime. Last year, we hit nearly 10% prime, with the highest price premium for prime with the most out there. There are a lot of economists that are saying we are only 20 to 25% of the way of worrying about topping out the prime market at all. And a lot of that is not domestic. The foreign demand for high quality U.S. beef is tremendous. So when we're looking at exports adding $400 worth of value, a lot of it is there. Now, just for domestically.
Dr. Fluharty.
Yes, sir.
Before you jump into that, all right, on these, you're saying 6 to 8 weight, 6 to 9 carcass weight. What is that live weight? I know everybody knows, but I don't, so I'm asking you.
So what's
the live weight on a 6 to 9?
so we're basically talking 1,050 to 1,500 pound.
Okay.
1,200 pound steer dressing 62% is 750 pounds,
Okay.
roughly. So,
Do you have, is there ways that, not like you, I kind of geek on numbers and things like that, but do you have any pictures of what them walking look like versus, and I mean, is it?
well, I can tell you this. They have half an inch back fat.
So
Because
they jiggle with it?
they jiggle a little bit, but not excessively.
Okay.
4/10 of an inch back fat is the yield grade 3. 6/10 is 3.5. 8/10 is 4. So they probably have between 4/500 and 3/4 of an inch of back fat, right around a half an inch. Now, where do you look? Well, when you're looking at cattle, you look over their back. And if you've ever seen cattle that look level, and then 2/3 of the way back their back, there's a little dimple down, and then it comes up and it looks like someone just stuck their finger in there and it stayed down. What that is on either side of that, the fat is the actual depth, and that dimple is where the fat, where that tissue that's associated with the skin is not broken free from a dorsal process. If it popped free, it would all be flat. That's one place you look. This is going to sound really weird, but there's a really big data set out there that, from a company that I can't mention, that they look at, their buyers look at the dew claws. That on fed cattle, that if you have thin dew claws versus dew claws that are starting to get bigger, that those bigger dew claws actually do relate to higher quality. You look at the brisket, you look at the back fat, and you keep them healthy. That's my number one thing. And I'll talk about this more than once, there's a lot of data showing that an animal that has gotten sick has tougher steaks. Because what happens is that the entire physiology of that animal is changing. And it creates a cross-linking of something called type 2 collagen throughout the body. And even though it recovers, it will have a tougher steak than if it didn't. And that's been found from studies that are using half sibs and tracking health records and in large studies. And so we have a lot of things we can do wrong. What I want to leave you with is, and granted, I'll say it again, I grew up on a cow-calf operation, but I was trained as a feedlot guy and work in that world. And when I'm selecting bulls, right or wrong, I use multi-trait selection, but I want all my bulls, every bull we use at the university is at least a plus 1.3 on Markling. I won't look at a bull that's less than that. Part of that is because we're trying to do research now for feeding cattle in the southeast. And if I don't have the genetics for Markling, I'm not going to show an impact of heat stress because my cattle didn't have the right genetics. And if you're going to feed cattle in hot weather, you better buy yourself some safety factor there by having genetics that can marble excessively so that they can put up with the heat stress. Weaning weight is the best relationship to cow milk production. Yearling weight has the relationship to what your animal's going to do in the feedlot. So I want cattle that are positive on ribeye, 1.3 on marbling or above. And if I keep them positive for ribeye, I'm not just going to get a bunch of small cattle, and I look at yearling weight heavily. I've also seen down here a lot of people that are really, really afraid of a CED of 7 or 8 or 9. And I can understand that on heifers, but I was always taught that your cows ought to be able to give birth to a calf that was 7.5% of that cow's mature weight. And folks, we haven't had 1,200 pound cows in 20 years. Those 1,400 pound cows ought to be able to give birth to a calf that's bigger than 55 pounds. We worry so much about low birth weight that we give a lot up on the other end. And I promise you, feedlots know this. You know, we can track about 85, I'll get to you really quick here. We can track about 85% of the cattle that are sold. Feedlots have one person for every 1,000 head. You go into any big feedlot and you look at their office people are busy. They are taking those back tags off and they are tracking back to the purchase. Those feedlots that are really successful, they know the good groups of cattle and the bad groups of cattle in every sale, and their order buyers are told to buy these. In many cases, yeah.
Have we gone too far with heifers being that small reproductive tract and having those small calves just like you're talking about? We got a lot of producers that have some problem with some heifers with having that small reproductive tract like that.
Yeah. We can pay so much attention to get them small, but what we do is we narrow up the pelvis. I mean, skeletal structure is the same. You have those really small birth weights for generations with really small calves. You can create your own problems. So the reality of it is, I think a factor in retaining heifers really needs to be pelvic measurements. I mean, we have a lot of great opportunities out here for data, but we have the ability when we're running a calf through a chute to actually get an idea of whether it's a narrow pelvis or not, rather than breeding it and waiting 9 months and finding out we have to pull a calf. Okay, varying off of this, but that's a great point. You'll find that I do squirrel every once in a while. I got a lot of gray hair. I go off on tangents. So.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
So if you're shooting for a prime, what percent do you think is genetics, good and dollar beef genetics versus nutrition and maintenance?
The question was, I'm shooting for prime. What do I think the percentage of is dollar beef genetics and management and diet? And I can tell you that it's about 50-50. And that's 50-50, assuming that you have a decent feedlot diet, not a great feedlot diet. But the reality of it is, that's what we're going to talk about the next 3 nights after I get off of the grading and talk about that. But if you want to create the greatest variability in feeding possible, stick a steer stuffer out there with the round bale.
What?
Stick a steer stuffer out there with the round bale and you will create more variability in your cattle because you're allowing the cattle to eat what they want to eat. You are not feeding a diet. If it paid, every large feedlot in America would cut down on labor and use steer stuffers and round bales. Now, I know that they may have a place on many operations, probably the majority in this room. But the reality of it is, if corn is $3.65, it's not that bad. If corn is $8 and above, it gets really expensive. And if you're going to do that, you better have really good genetics to make sure that your cattle get a lot of marbling, because you need to make that up. And I'm going to show you a lot of data on that kind of stuff.
So you're not in favor of creek feeding, is what you're saying?
I love creek
You
feeding.
do like creek feeding?
Yeah, I love creek feeding. Creek feeding has a payback of it's roughly 8.2 pounds of creek feed as fed per pound of additional gain, and it improves marbling. Now, I shouldn't have let you come because you've already taken up the next 3 lectures.
My bad.
So,
See what you gotta come back for to get the real details. I'm just
yeah, that's right.
sampling.
Yeah, you're my lead-in. Yes.
How do you get the dress percentage versus percent cutability? How is that? Is that after you've trimmed off some more?
So that's a great question. How do you go from dressing percentage to percent cutability? Dressing percentage is the percentage of hot carcass weight related to live weight. We know that as cattle go from about a yield grade 1, they dress about 62%, versus you go down to a 5, you get a dressing percentage of about 64. That is based upon fat. That is the additional fat in the carcass going from a yield grade 1 to a yield grade 4. These are rough values. The dressing percentage is an estimate. The percent cutability comes off of the USDA expectations for cattle. Yield grade 1 have a range, but their top cutability is 52.3%. Yield grade 1s have natural percent cutability of 50.1% to 52.3. I just used the high all the way over here. And that cutability is the percent of that carcass in boneless, closely trimmed retail cuts from the rib, loin, chuck, and round. So those have been well established for probably 30 or 40 years, the cutability estimates. And the reason this works is because bone is pretty constant. Bone is constant between 10 and 15%, but there is a range. But here's what I want to show you. What I really want you to understand is, why do packers pay you so much less for a yield grade 4 than a yield grade 2 or 3? It's because of the yield grade 2 with a live weight of 1,250 pounds, they're going to have approximately 390 pounds of meat to sell. Whereas with the yield grade 4, they're going to have about 360 pounds of meat to sell from that same 1,250 pound live weight animal that happened to be a yield grade 4 because it has more back fat. Now, seam fat, which I'm going to talk about later, there's actually twice as much seam fat, and that's the fat between the muscles, as there is back fat in an animal. So it's not just that all that weight is from the back fat, it's from all the fat between the muscles and the chuck that get pretty dramatic. So if I use this and I run that same steer through the numbers and the price, or the boneless retail trim pounds, my break-even price on a yield grade 1 animal is $5.06 per pound for those 405 pounds, versus yield grade 5, my break-even is $5.94 per pound, because there's only 345 pounds in that carcass. What's this mean? It means that if you're feeding cattle down here for a market, and you are not used to feeding cattle for a market, and you're starting out, you're going to learn to pay attention to back fat really, really quickly, as well as your diet. And I highly recommend, if you're working with a small processor that will allow you to go in and actually see your carcasses if they are ribbing them, or when they rib them, we'll take a picture of the carcass with a camera so that you can actually see what you're producing. It makes a huge, huge difference. And we're going to start having those things at the university. We're going to start doing what Texas A&M does with their programs of having producers coming in and run through cutability stuff. But what I want you to understand, and this is finishing me up, But I just wanted to take something, let's say that you have cattle that you're gonna take to a heavier weight. And is it always paid to take cattle to a heavier weight? If you've got an animal that really needs to be marketed as 1,210 pounds, a steer weighing 1,210 pounds with a 62% dress, it would have a 750 pound hot carcass weight. If that was valued at $2.58 a pound for a yield grade 3 is the price in here, it would be worth $1,935. Now, a lot of times if a cattle feeder or cattle buyer comes and they tell you to feed it an additional 30 days, is it always in your best interest to do so if that animal's really where it is? Well, if you feed that animal an additional 30 days, it gains 3 pounds a day and you take it to 1,300 pounds, the dressing percentage ought to go up about 1.5% to 63.5% because you're putting on more fat. But if you do that with this steer, it hits a yield grade of a 4. So there is a discount for a yield grade 4 at 12 cents a pound. And that animal is going to gain in carcass weight $94 because of the increase in weight, even with that discount for yield grade 4. But does that mean it really is the best thing to do? If you're really paying yourself yardage for your time, your bedding, your labor, your electricity, your machinery, right now it's running about 55 cents a day. It's going to cost you 18 cents per pound to gain. And if your diet's costing you 14 cents per pound to gain, if my average weight between 1,210 and 1,300 is 1,255 pounds. So that's what I use for that 30-day period. I assume that steer, 1,255 pounds, is going to need about 29 pounds of feed. So it's going to take 9.73 pounds of feed per pound to gain during that additional 30 days in the feedlot. And I gave you all these written out so that you could go home and play with it. But your cost to gain is $1.36 during that period of time for that 30 days. So I take $1.36 as my feed cost, 18 cents for yardage, comes out to $1.54 per pound total cost for that additional gain times 90 pounds. It cost me $139. So I took $139 and I only increased my carcass weight by $94 in value. So I actually lost $44 by taking it to a heavier weight. Now folks, when you're not feeding cattle all the time, you kind of look at this and go, well, why is he going through this? Because I promise you, once you start feeding cattle, you're going to know what your yardage charge is per head. You're going to have to. You're going to have to know what it costs you a day in bedding and what it costs in electricity or machinery to start figuring these out. And that 55 cents per head per day is a pretty close average for these days. But what I want you to do at the end of 3 more of these sessions is give you enough information that you can start figuring out some of these things with your own feed and your own costs. I'm going to finish up real quickly here. Animal welfare issues can have a huge impact on carcass value. Folks, the hide comes off. Packing plants have inspectors. One of their things that they're looking for are bruises and animal welfare. Now, the story I'm going to tell you is absolutely true. It happened about 30 years ago. We marketed a group of fed cattle at Ohio State. We put them on the truck. We drove to the packing plant. It was about a 3-hour drive. The people I went to the packing plant before the cattle were loaded, but I'm the guy who was the feedlot manager and I signed off on the cattle before they were loaded. I got to the packing plant about an hour later, the inspector came, and by the way, inspectors have arrest capability if they determine there's an animal welfare issue. And he came up to me and was very upset. and was talking to me about animal welfare because they ran 3 or 4 cattle that just had huge bruising, like these animals over here on the right where there's bruising on the rump and on the left. And the reality of it was there were actually charges filed against the trucker because the only thing that saved us is we didn't have a cane on the property. The trucker was beating the cattle after they had gone up the chute and beaten them on the back. And people forget that the hide comes off. It's a really big deal. I also don't allow a hot shot
Thank you.
anywhere. For 40 years, I haven't allowed a hot shot in any feedlot or cow-calf herd that we have because there's no need for it. If an animal is crazy, you get rid of it.
Amen.
And if you know how to work cattle, I will tell you this, that when I work cattle, this is as loud as I talk right now. You don't need to yell. You need to know how to move them. And we need to make them calm. And here's the other thing on that calm thing and why I don't allow hot shots. I've seen people that are working calves that are working them too rough and they use a hot shot to get them in the chute and then they vaccinate them. And so, okay, you're taking a vaccine that they have to mount an immune response, but all you've done is you've increased their adrenaline. And adrenaline is a glucocorticoid. And a glucocorticoid is an immune suppressant. So by not working that animal calmly the way it should be worked, you've probably done just as much good with that vaccine as if you had poured it on the ground. And then you wonder why they get sick. We really do need to work cattle calmly. And finally, this is the last thing I'll show. This is hail damage. And so sometimes these western storms get really, really bad. And I will take any questions now. I hope you come back next week. I hope that I haven't bored you too badly or that I've made you think. I'm going to ask you to do this. You have a homework assignment. You've got to look. Go home and look at it because next week I may call on people just at random and ask them questions about quality grade and yield grade.
I have a question on your grading. If you
Yes.
don't get a live weight before you have your carcass weight, how do you know what your yield is?
So that's a really interesting thing. The question was, if I don't get a live weight, how do I know what my yield was? If I get a hot carcass weight and I get a back fat, I can estimate my final weight. Because if I have 8/10 of an inch of back fat and I have a carcass weight, then I know that animal was probably a yield grade 4, and I know that that has approximately a 64% dress. And if it had 4/10 of an inch of back fat, then I know it probably had a 62% dress. So I take that hot carcass weight